Hello and welcome to Fascinated by Fungi Live. Today we're going to be speaking with Tim Clemens, who is founder of the Ironwood Foraging Company and president of the Minnesota Mycological Society. He is an awesome forager. He is hilarious and posts a bunch of great internet memes. I'm definitely going to ask him about that. And he has a broad knowledge about a ton of plants in Minnesota and Midwest that I have no clue about. So I'm super excited to talk to him. I had the chance to meet Tim last year, last January, in the age of pre-COVID, and we got to hang out, and he's really cool. So I figured to have him on live. If you don't follow him, you definitely should. He's a great dude. So we're going to get into it. I see he's on the call here, so I'm going to add him in.
Per usual, we'll kind of go back and forth between the two of us. If you have questions, pop them in the comments. We'll see if we can kind of spin them in a conversation. Hey, Tim, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Gordon?
Pretty good, man. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, since the before times. Seems like much longer than a year ago.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, yeah, that was a special weekend up in Oregon. We got to hang out with a bunch of mushroom people and got to sort of put names to faces and actually get to meet some of the people from the sort of social media mushroom community. And it was a real pleasure and a treat to actually get to interact with you there. And, I feel like we can try to have a little bit of that community from afar.
That's true. I mean, it is how it started, and now we're all like inextricably linked. Yeah, that was surreal. Seeing everybody in person, there's always that kind of like stutter moment where you're like, wait a minute, this person's real.
Yeah, they're not just a face on a screen that, talks to you through a little thing. They, human beings. And, we all come with our very human flaws and other things like that. But, it's all part of it. So, so I was trying to express to people what your social media has meant to me, I guess. And just scrolling through your profile, it's a montage of beautiful plants, mushrooms, beautiful people, because you've got you and your wife on there. You guys are pretty attractive looking. So
yes, the elf queen herself.
I mean, what got you into foraging, and like, how do you know so much?
Good question. I ask myself that sometimes. Like, how did this all happen? I definitely started from natural tendencies. So as a child, I know I was always sneaking into people's gardens and like eating their raspberries. I couldn't tell you how I found out raspberries were even edible in the first place.
Question: would you call yourself food motivated?
I'm extremely food motivated, and that comes from growing up with an identical twin, and we're both trying to push each other out of the nest. So it was always like, who gets the last enchilada? Like who can eat more berries? I mean,
yeah.
Oh yes, for sure. So fences didn't stop me. Dogs were only like, I could outrun
a temporary, yeah.
And then I remember eating a gooseberry. I didn't know what that was. I just like something in my lizard brain was like, yeah, you got to take that and you got to try that. Yeah. So I didn't really get into foraging in a real way until college. And that's when I started learning about, I just found out my father had passed away and I never knew the man. But I get on his side of the family, my Ojibwe heritage. For anybody not knowing what Ojibwe is, you might have heard the word Chippewa, or our own word is Anishinaabe. It's a First Nations in Canada, and it's a tribe here in the United States, spreading from roughly North Dakota to the East Coast. But learning about that heritage, like foraging, is like intricately tied to the language. Any language you speak has its own way of looking at the world. Like English has its own, and it's a little bit invisible to us. But Ojibwe has its own. And so it doesn't have like genders, for instance, but it does have animate and inanimate nouns. So like maybe a rock that's heated up is animate, or a pail of water is alive, but like the pail itself isn't, only when it has water in it. So it's really cool. It's a really cool way to look at the world. So that just kind of like snowballed into the Ojibwe New Year, which is maple syrup tapping.
Excellent.
So like you sitting around.
As a Canadian, I can identify with that. So
right? Yeah. Have you ever made maple syrup?
I've been around it. I haven't like tapped the trees myself and boiled it all down, but I've seen all of that happening, so I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, but it's in your blood, so anytime you need some syrup, you can just like prick your
Just,
finger and yeah, exactly,
yeah.
straight to the veins. But yeah, that's what really got me into it. So I started with plants, and it was really this whole world I, had clearly been surrounded by my entire life, but hadn't really seen. And so I felt like a tourist, in Minneapolis, where I'm from and was born and spent my entire life. Felt like a tourist all over again. There's like new
But it was
tastes,
just,
new smells.
yeah, the capacity to view world through a different film and suddenly realize that, like, oh my gosh, all those colorful things that have sort of been in the periphery are now food. And that, for me, that's very motivating to suddenly realize that all these things you've been looking at for years and were sort of maybe a passing curiosity at most suddenly become sustenance. And that is why I asked you about the food motivation thing, because for me, it is very inspiring to get out there and find out what you can eat, because it sort of reveals the world anew. And like you said, you can be a tourist in your own hometown because you had no idea there's so many good things around.
Right? Yeah. And then it obviously spiraled out of control into mushrooms. I think that's when I went really off the deep end.
As one does.
Yeah. And so it's all really autodidactic, self-taught. I've had a lot of, I've met a lot of beautiful, intelligent people along the way who have taught me so much. I definitely would not consider myself an expert because, I know so many people that I would call experts, and I'm not even close. So but it's a lifelong journey. Yeah. I think if you're doing it right, and if you're like pushing your boundaries correctly, you're going to find the people that make you feel like you'll never be an expert. And then someday someone just thinks you are one later in life. Maybe when I'm like 60, we'll see.
But I think that the point of being, autodidact, self-taught is really important, because almost every single person that I've talked to on here or met in the mushroom community doesn't have an official background in anything having to do with mushrooms. It's almost entirely this self-motivated pursuit of knowledge, and the lack of, I'm not saying lack of education in a bad way, but just the fact that people have gone all in on this stuff. And some of the most impressive mycologists that are out there, guys like Stamets and Aurora and Alan Rockefeller, they have literally no education, no official education in mushrooms, and yet they are the people that everybody looks to and says they are the experts. They are the people who are at the top of their field. And I think, foraging is somewhat similar in that it can be a very sort of self-motivated study. And so it's always amazing to find people like you that have like accrued this knowledge, and you're like, yeah, I kind of just started looking at stuff and trying to make sense of things. And next thing I know, I'm apparently an expert, so much so that you can start your own foraging company.
Yeah, exactly. Ironwood Foraging. Yeah, started that in 2017, but
yeah,
last year was like the first full year.
That's pretty cool. What, in terms of like being self-taught, how did you teach yourself? Because I sort of know what I've done with mushrooms, but it's been a real mishmash of things. Like, how did you learn about plants and then, transition into mushrooms here?
Kind of in one phrase, I cast a wide net. So it just became this like fire inside me that I just needed to feed. And so I just sought out anybody who I thought knew anything about anything. Like any class that showed up on social media. I started following a lot of, pages, like natural oriented pages. In my case, I started following a lot of like Ojibwe advocacy groups and just community groups.
And was that a way to sort of connect with your heritage in a way as much as it was to learn about anything?
Absolutely. Yeah. Being an anthropologist, that's what my degree was in. Like concepts like deep time and heritage and connection to ancestors, like that is extremely important to me. And it's also, it's huge in the Ojibwe community, obviously. And it was a unique synergy. Like all of this just built on each other. And so it just felt extremely right. And I feel like, I was kind of a young man in my early 20s and I needed direction, and this was perfect.
It helps kind of, when you get out of college, they say the world is your oyster, and you're like, yeah, but I'm sitting here faced with the paradox of choice. I don't know what to overlay on the world to make sense of it. And unless someone hands you an internship or says, hey, go here, do this. Yeah, what the hell do you do? And anthropology isn't exactly the most easily applicable field of study either. For everyone who wants to get into anthropology, it's great, but there's not that many jobs out there saying, hey, would you like to be our official anthropologist? Like, no, that's not a thing. It's heartening to hear that you were able to create some of that structure and framework for yourself to like focus in on what was important and bring meaning to your world.
Yeah, for sure. Anthropology is a tough one. You know, it's so broadly applicable that you almost have like what is that called when a lion is trying to chase the right zebra and there's like prey indecision or something like that is what it's called. It's like there's so many possibilities that you just never end up choosing one. And I think choosing something, like, I think a big problem that I had when I was in my early 20s was like, you have to kind of, you know, making a choice is also destroying potential. So like,
yes,
it's choosing to, you know, have this unfolding in a different way, but also there's all these things that you were kind of hazy about, like I might do that and potential feels good. And so you got to destroy that and choose finally. And this didn't feel like a tough choice because, I mean, like, again, it was so synergistic. Everything was tied in.
You didn't feel like you were sacrificing other opportunities to pursue this. This just felt like it was right. And that's, for me, I can relate, because that's once I started learning about mushrooms, I was like, oh, yeah, this is tapping into something really deep and this feels really good. It's not like I'm ignoring other things. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually doing what I should and wanted to be doing as opposed to just doing what other people wanted me to do. So. Yeah,
exactly. Gordon, random question. Did you grow up with like a carpeted stairwell in your house? Like,
I guess, we did have some carpets, and I used to slide down the stairs occasionally.
Did you ever, when you were going up them, did you ever go like full animal on all fours?
Oh yeah. I don't think I've climbed stairs normally until the last couple of years of my life. Otherwise it was always just like, ah!
Yeah, right? Doesn't that feel deeply right somehow? Your brain's just like, yeah, gotta. That's how foraging feels to me. It's just like natural, do it, and it just feels great. So.
But other than that, just base animal instinct. It's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's like a unique thing that kind of keeps you in and keeps you learning, because it's its own positive reinforcement. Like if you taste like spruce tips, or you taste your first like high bush cranberry, you're like, yeah, this is amazing. I'm going to keep doing this.
Well, there's that serotonin and dopamine reward system too, which is, I think, getting into foraging, getting into mushroom hunting is one of the best things you could do potentially for mental health and physical health, because suddenly you're driven to be outside more, you're interacting with nature. And, there's emerging evidence here that just literally being in nature, your body is absorbing aromatic compounds and things that are stimulating production of serotonin. So like literally being outside makes you feel good, which I think we've all known for a long time, but there's like actual scientific evidence to say that it physically generates, physiological chemical changes in the brain that make you feel good. That's cool. If you're adding the reward system to eating something on top of that, yeah.
Right, yeah. How did you get into, so I know your education is in yeasts. How did that translate into field mycology?
Oh, Lord. Well, I did biochemistry as an undergrad, and I did it again in grad school because I could never choose between chemistry and biology. So I was sort of like stuck somewhere in the middle, and I was like, I'll just do what's broadly applicable, like, anthropology kind of thing. Yeah. And then when I was at Santa Cruz, I was on the sailing team, and we were less of a sailing team and more of a drinking team with a sailing problem. So we were very lucky because one of my buddies, the captain one year, he was a phenomenal home brewer. And so I would go over and watch him homebrew and, kind of help him tool around as he was like working on his recipes and stuff like that. And I got really inspired to try homebrewing myself. So I went out and bought some equipment, and I brewed a couple batches of beer. And I realized very quickly that I was never going to be one of the world's great brewers because I am not the most meticulous person. I'm not the world's best scientist, and I'm not the best at writing things down. I'm not always good at like doing absolutely everything. In OChem labs and stuff, when I would write out the protocol, I'd kill it. But on my own, I tend to be a little lazy and occasionally cut a corner. And in beer, that is not a good thing because you will get contamination, you will have dirty bottles, you'll have beer that's oxidized. And so my beer was okay, but looking back at it, I'm like, it was really bad homebrew. I was making really bad homebrew. But what I took out of that was the interest in yeast metabolism and how varied it could be across, brewing different beers, you use different yeasts. And so what really struck me was like, wow, I use these different yeasts, and depending on whether or not the room was hot or the room was cold or whatever, I got totally different flavors. So I was like, man, I want to learn about like the genetics of yeast as it relates to beer making. So I got to Davis, I talked to Charlie Bamforth, who was like the beer guy, and he was like, piss off, I don't take grad students. And I was like, just crestfallen, heartbroken, which actually turned out to be a good thing because Charlie was sort of on the end of his career, and he didn't take beer students because there's not a lot of jobs for PhD beer people out there.
Yeah.
But I did a few other things at Davis, and then I found a woman, Linda Basson, who did wine yeast genetics, and that turned out to be a really good fit because Linda was a phenomenal advisor and taught me a ton about yeast and a ton about wine, which is nice because I still love beer and I like wine. But I didn't have to ruin beer by getting super nerdy about it because now I can't have a glass of wine without getting really overly analytical. Whereas I can just enjoy like a cold beer sometimes and not.
I thought that was the good part about wine, though. Isn't that what draws so many people to it?
It is. It's just the problem when someone's like, "Hey, I got this like 8-bottle or whatever." I'm like, "Ooh." Let me tell you all the reasons why this is like not quality wine. Although like the wine that's made, you know, I've been to like some of the biggest wineries in the world that make just like absolutely, you know, 400,000 gallon tanks of wine kind of thing. And like that wine is better than any of the wine any Roman emperor ever drank, sort of empirically from like a technical standpoint by the way they're able to make it. So
I've thought about that kind of often. Yeah. Like I bet they would love Boone's Farm.
Probably. Hell, even Mad Dog might go over well with the Roman emperor. So.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, they used to put like salt and swamp rosemary and fenugreek and all sorts of weird stuff in their wine because they didn't understand that air was what spoiled wine. So they were trying to, you know, I forget what your question was. Something about yeast, I guess. I mean, this is what translated to field mycology.
Yeah, to like field mycology and looking for actual like fruit bodies of mushrooms.
In some sense, none of those things were applicable at all, and I had to kind of.
But they were applicable to me because I mean, anthropology. I love talking about culture.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I think there was one thing we did in grad school that kind of got me ready for like the idea of mushroom hunting is we were trying to isolate wild yeast. So we went out and we're trying to figure out what did yeast from California look like? Because most of the yeast that are out there are going to be stuff that's commercial. So it's from a brewery, it's from a winery. It's usually yeast that have come over from Europe, which originated in China kind of thing. So like the world of yeast that people use for brewing and stuff has emerged from China genetically. And so there are native yeast populations everywhere. It's just a question of how to find them. So we as a lab went out and took little pieces of tape and taped all these different trees. And from hardwood effluent, you can find like actual native Saccharomyces strains. So that kind of going out and like searching for organisms, doing like a biodiversity type survey got me mentally ready for like going out into the woods and looking in little nooks and crannies and trying to find like where fungi might be hiding. So
is your tree effluent hobby, is that just a like secret way for you to cover up your Canadian need for sap?
Maybe. That may have tapped into something deep inside of me. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Oh man.
Okay, so you were self-taught. You cast a wide net. You reach back to your heritage. But what other types of resources did you use to learn about foraging? Do you have any like books or websites or recommendations you can kind of give to people who are interested in this stuff?
Yeah, I'd say one cool foraging site that is kind of hit or miss depending on what your like local community is doing on there is fallingfruit.org. They're a nonprofit and it's basically just Google Maps that that has like foraged goods interposed over it.
That's one that like people can like add the tree in their yard if they're like, oh, I got too many oranges and I don't, you know, that's falling. Okay, yeah. I remember hearing about that in Davis. Yeah, very cool.
Sometimes the cool thing is if your city has added its tree inventory from its forestry department, then like Minneapolis has. If you look at Minneapolis, we just have thousands of entries because it's every single boulevard tree added to there. And so if you want to know what like a Russian olive looks like, you just go to this address and you just drive up and you're like, okay, this is what this is, compare it to the book, sweet. And then like it just takes the guesswork out of it. If you want to know what like a swamp white oak looks like compared to a red oak, like you can drive. I mean, it makes it super easy to learn. There's also like a big dumpster diving community on there. I mean, like foraging is foraging. So that like foraging is huge. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some of them don't even involve food, honestly. But so that website's really good. And then books, tons of books. I mean, like any book I could get my hand on. But the ones I started off with, I'll show you it right here. It'll be backwards. But so there's this author. His name is Sam Thayer. And he writes The Forager's Harvest. and he's based out of Wisconsin. And I mean, I read everything by him as soon as I could get my hands on it. He has 3 books, and he's just incredibly knowledgeable. It's not really a field guide. It's like a mix of a field guide and a novel and his own experiences.
Okay. So he speaks his own story. It kind of spins in plant identification as it goes, which is nice, because sometimes people, like, I can tell you, I've never sat down and read an identification guide front to cover, like, cover to cover kind of thing. It just, I don't have the patience for it. And so having some narrative spun in kind of keeps you emotionally engaged, and it's not just like memorization of thing after thing. So
yeah, it makes your human brain really tap in and stay engaged instead of just being like stuffing as many facts in there as you can, and then you realize you forgot everything like a week later anyway. Like it has to, like, you have to kind of like, it's almost like knitting, which I really want to get into, but I haven't yet. But it's like knitting. I mean, you have to like knit knowledge into your life, or else it's like just going to get replaced. It's going to get blown away, whatever,
Yeah.
So that's.
Have you ever heard of the concept of a memory palace? It's something that there's like people who do like who are professional like memory people. They can memorize these like huge strings of numbers and stuff. What they do is they create little like mnemonics for themselves to remember like strings of numbers, and so they tell themselves this like very strange story that's like a series of mnemonics, and that's how they can memorize this like long string of numbers. But from what you were just saying kind of made me think of that, because it's like, to retain knowledge, it's easy. I think anyone can sit down and in theory be like, okay, I'm going to absorb this list of 20 things, and you go to the test and you can shit out 18 of them with, getting 2 wrong, and you're like, okay, great. But like 2 weeks later, if you were to do the same thing, you're going to get almost all of them wrong, or at least like maybe 50-50 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because you can't retain that stuff unless you've given it meaning, unless you've provided context for it. And so that, like, the idea of a memory palace is basically the same as like reading a book where you remember somebody's personal stories, and that's what helps you remember that, oh man, this fruit was so good because I remember that guy talked about being like 5 years old and having his first taste of it, whatever it was that gives you that kind of personal touch. And then when you tell other people the stories about it, you're retelling the stories, generating that context and meaning for them as well. So I just love to hear about,
Yeah, it's really similar to like, so when I started learning the Ojibwe language, not only is its own worldview, but its stories culturally. Stories play an extremely important role, and they serve this like, it's almost like an ancient technology, if you will, like that knitting, like that memory palace. Making stories so full of meaning, but easy to tell because they're a story. That's fascinating, and that's not, necessarily super straightforward. I mean, that's not a super straightforward way of like conveying meaning over time, right? Like, for instance, the Ojibwe word for mushrooms is Wajashkweduns. And so, like, yeah, I'll say it again. Wajashkweduns.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so what Wajashk itself is also the name for the muskrat. And might not seem like initially very obvious, like, why are these basically called like little muskrats? Like, where does that come from? Yeah. Well, it's because that word Ajashk means mud. And so like when you start learning, so Wajashkweduns, the word for mushrooms, contains all this other information. So like it makes you instantly think of a muskrat, and then it makes you think of mud. What do all these have in common? Well, muskrats make their homes out of mud, and then it's in a dome shape out of mud. And so the mushroom essentially is like a little dome shape from mud, or from the dirt. So
which tells you how to find mushrooms too, right? Look for the shrubs.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's really cool. I mean,
that is cool.
Yeah. And so that's a way of learning too. That was definitely an avenue.
Do you follow, I assume you follow Anna Breakfast of Champions and her like etymology Monday kind of thing? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So if anyone wants to see more breakdown of like the meaning and roots of mushroom words, and how that you create some of that meaning, and how you can like memorize some of that stuff because you now have a story to tell about it, Anna's a great account to check out for that kind of thing. But I don't think anyone's out there doing it for Ojibwe, language. So that's
yeah, not so much. Although I would say that so I do have Anna in my story right now. I do have her posted. So if anybody looks at my story right now, you'll see Breakfast of Champignons. And I also have an account tagged called My Wild Wisconsin, and she does a lot of Ojibwe names for plants and mushrooms, and she, when she knows them, she's learning as well. It's always a process, but she does post a lot of like etymology for Ojibwe. It's really cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Was there?
I
mean, so you had, yeah. That's. I mean, that's for me. That was an amazing part. Is like finding people in your area who you can follow, and like it's like having real-time phenology reports every morning. You wake up and look at your phone, and you're like, oh, look, somebody found chicken in the woods, I better get out there,
Right, that's so important. Yeah, and way to bring up phenology. Like phenology is super important because you could know everything there is to know about like a chanterelle, but if you're Minnesota and California have different seasons for chanterelles, so if you're in the wrong spot and you learn from the wrong resource, you're going to be out there looking in like a totally wrong area or month. And so you do need like focus on regional.
Yeah, definitely.
I know in the Midwest, sometimes it's difficult. Like if you search for something from the Midwest, I mean, it could be anywhere from Ohio to Texas to
right. You have a pretty broad range of what counts as the Midwest kind of thing.
Right.
It's not...
And they're totally different. So that's to do like upper Midwest, or like try to, like if you're in California, I'm not sure of the exact eco zones, but like try something that's like very specific if possible.
Yeah. And California is interesting because there's like, if I drive 2 hours to the coast, I'm in sort of the same ecosystem that runs all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. But if I go out for a hike here in Napa, I'm basically in the same ecosystem that's in LA. And so I have access to some and then if I drive like 2 hours up to the mountains, suddenly I'm in the Sierras and I'm in an alpine habitat and I have completely different trees, completely different mushrooms. And so California is a crazy like cross section of weird biodiversity things, and I'm sure you have some pockets like that too. Is there anywhere that you go that's like that is somewhat different, or do you have things that are more sort of homogenous?
Yeah, we have. Minnesota is. I mean, people don't think of it as a dynamic landscape if they think of it at all, but we do have about 5 different bioregions, pretty starkly different, and then we also have geological regions. So. The glaciers covered quite a bit of Minnesota about 10,000 years ago, but there's a part of it that they didn't erode away and make flat. And
is Minnesota very flat because of the glaciers? Yeah.
Yeah, incredibly flat because of the glaciers, except for more up north, and then you have like the continental shield, which ties into Canada, and that's like 2 hours north. And then you have like what we call mountains. So like I think the highest point is Lutsen, and it's like a hill basically, but it's a mountain for us. And I've been to like real mountains, and so it's kind of laughable to call it anything but a hill. But yeah, super different up there. Super different geology, very old, lots of different plants. The lichen is like totally different than down here. So yeah,
lichen is so cool.
It is really cool.
On lichen. Yeah,
I don't know anything about it.
Do you want to hear a little factoid about lichen that I like to share?
I absolutely do.
Okay. So this came out in a Nature paper, I think in like 2009 or something like that. So this is still a fairly new finding, but they've always known that lichen is a symbiosis between like algae and fungi, where fungi provide the body and algae provide the photosynthesis, and then they're kind of like living together. And it's crazy because you can have different combinations of algae and fungi creating different lichens, and you start mixing those things up and mixing and matching, you get very different types of lichens, even though there's some of the same species in common. The crazy thing that they didn't know before was that it's not just a fungus and a lichen, there's also yeast in there. So there's species of yeast that are actually helping to do the metabolic transformation between the sugars that the plant makes and then what the fungi need. So there's like a third organism in there that if you start thinking about every lichen as a composite of potentially like 3 different kinds of organisms, and you can mix and match all of them, you're like, holy crap, that's why there's like a bajillion species of lichens. And there's such biodiversity of it, and a lot of it's uncatalogued or unrecognized because we haven't started doing sequencing or even fully recognized that there's these different layers of organisms within these little sandwiches on rocks,
Yeah, they're almost like little, when I picture space, like if humans ever live on the moon or Mars or something, it's almost like they're little space domes where they survive like anywhere, it seems. I know at the Minnesota Mycological Society, our interim scientific advisor, Dr. Daniel Stanton, he studies lichen. And I mean, he might be sad for me to say that I don't know much about lichen, considering he's given like 2 presentations in the last year alone. But he does like lichenology in the Atacama Desert down in Chile. Cool. And the way they survive there is like I mean, it's almost like the exact analog to like humans surviving on Mars. I mean, it's crazy that they survived down there. They live on mist.
I was going to say, desert is not where to expect to see much lichen, but yeah, I guess if there's some mist, right?
And they're tumbleweed. It's like the tumbleweed is lichen. Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of wild.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, random fact there,
Did you?
too.
Yeah. You know that our tumbleweeds are native, right? They're like I remember reading that somewhere that like the classic tumbleweed is actually an invasive plant.
I actually didn't know which plant the tumbleweed was. I like in a vague way, I thought it was just like several plants that we just call tumbleweed.
I think there might be a few things, but I have a feeling reading at least one of the tumbleweeds, it's the classic thing in a Western, was like an invasive plant species. And you're like, oh, okay, like how many, and that's a funny thing too, like how many things do we take for granted? As even, think about like, what do you think of Italian food, right? Eggplants, tomatoes, like none of those things are native. Those are all like imported from the New World. Which is a good point that like Europe and America, the biodiversity has been so incredibly intermixed and confused, and right now we're in the middle of sort of a mushroom taxonomic revolution because of DNA sequencing, and because people are finally recognizing like, oh, we had all these names for mushrooms that came from European species. Type species are European, but we have our own species here in the United States. So much so that I think maybe even only 20 years ago, they're like, oh, yeah, there's one species of chanterelle in the United States. And you're like, no, bro.
There's probably like 20. I mean, it's crazy.
There's
at least 5.
There's, they say, there's probably like 40 in the country, and then within each state there might actually be upwards of like 20 or 30 species in each state potentially, depending on the diversity of the ecosystem and stuff like that. So,
it's funny seeing like daily I see Facebook discovering mushrooms before like like the slower moving like government or academic bodies. I mean like there's a white chanterelle in Minnesota that nowhere before 5 years ago you wouldn't find anyone who said it existed, but like mushroom hunters, aka field mycologists, would find it all the time, and so they like kind of dragged academia kicking and screaming quite literally to the exact spot, and we're like, look, they exist.
Sequence this.
We're vouchering this, we sequenced it exists. So so Facebook's a really good way to learn.
It is. And like, actually, that's one of the few things that I want Facebook for anymore, because I hate Facebook. It is a cesspool, but there is some really good mycological groups on there. And there's ones that are countrywide, and there's a lot that are very state specific. So again, like you were talking about, it's really important to find people who are in your area and can provide you local expertise. And that's, people are always asking me, what book should I buy? And I'm like, go buy a book that's local, go find one that's specific to your area, and that's going to be, you'll get the most value out of that. Kind of like what you were saying with reading about Wisconsin, at least, which was a similar biome and habitat to, where you are.
Exactly. So. Yeah.
Do you have any, are there websites that you like too? I mean, I know we sort of like have books, social media accounts. I mean, you can go on and on, I'm sure, but any websites that you're fond of?
Mushroomexpert.com is really good.
That's a really good one, yeah.
Yeah, Michael Kuo, he's based in Chicago, I think, and he's great. Let's see, Mushroom Observer, I don't use it a lot, but it's definitely like this real stuck in mycology, like it's really intense there, and it's amazing. So their maps are fantastic. They have the best like updated names typically. Current taxonomy. Let's see, what else? What else is
Do you use INAT? Are you a fan of INAT?
Yeah, I was trying to think of INAT.
For me, that's kind of like the gold standard of what I use. So
yeah, INAT's really good. I think it's truly the best one for like public engagement. And the Minnesota Mycological Society is going to be we're going to be working on a project where we get all of our members uploading to INAT.
Cool.
Just because it's a bit easier.
Are you guys going to do like a Myco Blitz or something like that?
Yeah, and we have been doing those for, many, many years. I mean, we've been a society since 1899. So Myco Blitzes have been happening since Myco Blitzes existed in the United States. But now we use INAT too. So it's really cool, makes it very easy and super engaging. And also I think people kind of need like, sometimes not necessarily, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we kind of need like instant feedback. And so when you take a picture and it gives you suggestions, that's kind of like, it triggers the dopamine or serotonin,
I think most, like, a lot of people have interest in mushrooms, but the interest is very skin deep, in the sense that if they say, what's this? And you tell them the answer, they're like, okay, cool. And they move on.
Quite literally,
or
just
if you
toss
say,
the mushroom.
yeah, just toss it, and they're like, okay, I don't remember that name. It means nothing to me. They toss it behind them,
Yeah.
and so that's why I like to always give people kind of a common name that's a little bit easier to relate to, as well as a scientific name, so that you're giving them both. And if someone wants to learn more, they can look up the scientific name and Google it and start learning like you and I did about just whatever it is. But if you want to just remember something, sometimes the common name at least will get you back to the scientific name, which gets you back to like being able to learn about it. And I like INAT because people's interest is so sort of skin deep. Most of the time they just want a quick answer and they want to keep moving. And INAT will at least get you in the ballpark of what you're looking at. Even if it's not exactly the right species, it'll be like, it's probably the right genre, at least the right class of stuff. And so that's, people can start adding meaning to things because they have an answer in their pocket, and that gives them structure that they didn't have previously. And so for that, I love the sort of the quick feedback element you talked about. So.
Yeah, and in education, it's so important to meet people where they are. I mean, you never know where someone's coming at this from. I mean, you don't know their life history or anything. So, and I mean, the seed you plant, maybe it pays off in 30 years. All of a sudden, they remember that one time they held a mushroom, and they're like, you know what? I'm just totally overtaken by that now, and that's like what I want to do with my life. Like, you just never know. And so, like, just always put out good things and meet people where they are. And just spread the nature love, you know?
Totally. I mean, I was really into mushrooms when I was like 5, and then again maybe when I was like 9, because basically experiences of finding a mushroom, like, I want more of this, and it never really snowballed into anything more. And then, but suddenly when I hit like 31 and I was in New Zealand, I was like laser focus on it, and so it took a long time for that stuff to kind of ferment, but it had a big impact clearly. So it, you know, just those little moments can make a big impression on people. So
totally.
Yeah. That is, speaking of which, though, you're president of the Minnesota Mycological Society, which has apparently been around for 121 years, kind of thing. That's pretty impressive.
Yep, it was founded by Mary Whetstone. She was a mycologist in the 1800s. She's very accomplished. Discovered a lot of mushrooms, and she actually founded the Minnesota Mycological Society to improve food security for pregnant mothers but also communities in general. She felt that mushrooms were a nutritious food that were abundant, and if people learned them, it would increase like community resilience and just food resilience for communities. So, we even have like a cool picture of her that we found in our archives, and I think there's a picture of her. I can't quite remember how long she lived, but I think at the 1915 Minnesota State Fair, there's like this massive mushroom display, like probably bigger than the one we have now. And that's with that's with how popular mushrooms are now and like modern conveniences. And so she just had like this massive like mushroom display, and it's just like mind-boggling. So we have a great group.
Yeah. I was gonna say, it's mind-boggling too, because like we have all this technology now, so like people are seeing more pictures of mushrooms than ever because of social media. But the mushrooms have been around this whole time. There's like, we're not finding anything new that they weren't finding 100 years ago. All these mushrooms are still the same stuff. It's just now we have the capacity to like report on it. But that's, you know, hearing that someone had this huge mycological display, you could walk up to that now and be like, I know what all of this stuff is, because mushrooms are evolutionary, you know, very long time frame kind of thing. We've been here for the blip of an eye. So sorry, that's cool. I'm glad to hear that you guys have a robust society there, and you're president of it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, man. Going on my second year. My first year was COVID year, so can't ask for better than that. It was wild.
A little tricky.
Yeah, I think we're doing forays again this year. People love the forays, and I do too. So yeah. I think
so
we have about 800 members now.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a club.
Maybe over 1,000.
Do you guys have a central? I mean, probably not central camp this year, but do you guys do like a yearly camp or meeting or anything like that?
It's my understanding that we used to, like before I was born, but now we do not. Kind of like our pseudo, we do many forays every year. I mean, we do at least 12, if not, 20. I mean, we do a ton. And this year we'll do a ton more because probably each of our former forays are going to have to be split into like 3 different ones each. So, I mean, it's going to be a lot. And we're moving like online to online signups, so it's never been easier to join a foray and, you know, to keep numbers down and responsible. But we have the Cable Northwoods foray, and that's organized by Britt Bunyard, who is the editor of Fungi magazine.
Fungi magazine, where is it?
Just in arm's reach. Yeah, look at that thing.
Boom. This is a great episode too, because this has Allison and a couple other people, slime mold ladies in it, which are really awesome. So yeah, awesome. Britt's great too. He's a really interesting guy. I saw a really cool talk by him on amanitas at Soma Camp last year. That's still bouncing around in my skull, living rent free with me thinking about saprophytic amanitas and the gene clusters of saprophytic amanitas and how they capacity to live mycorrhizally. And yeah, anyhow, but it's cool.
Yeah, Soma Camp. I mean, you guys like do so much. I always hear like these amazing presentations coming out of Soma Camp. I mean, you almost can't have a conversation about mushrooms or mushroom events. Yeah.
Well, sadly, there is no Soma Camp this year, and I was pushing to have like a digital or virtual version of it, but I just was too logistically complicated. So part of me is still thinking about like, how do I reach out to some of these speakers, and can we get people to come on and just do like a 20-minute, everybody come on and just like spit 20 minutes of like fun fungi facts and spread it out and get people like you to come just do a quick presentation and stuff like that. But who knows? Maybe someday.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. Yeah, I mean, the plant, like the foraging conventions as well have like all been canceled. We have a really big one. I think it's probably the biggest one in the country. The Midwestern Wild Harvest Festival. And that's like capped at 250 people every year. And it's usually somewhere in Wisconsin. I think 2 years ago, because it was canceled last year, it was in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. And it's just foraging, like Sam Thayer and then Alan Burgo, the forager chef. He's amazing. He's an amazing resource as well, a friend of mine.
Cool.
They're all there, and again, it's like I can't believe these people are real people, like because they just seem larger than life.
Well, I mean, that's the crazy thing about this community is like it's not that big a community. So there's very visible people, but in reality, like I went to Soma Camp for 2 years and I got to meet Paul Stamets and David Aurora. I mean, those are the guys, and I met them both times I went. It was not. And they were pretty approachable, personable guys. I got a photo and got to shake their hands and talk to them for a couple of minutes. And
that's what I
was like, wow, yeah, I've only been in this for a number of years, and yet I'm able to meet the people that are at the top of the field kind of thing. And then you realize you're like, it's not just these guys that have all the publicity that are amazing. It's everyone else who's here who doesn't necessarily have the same high profile, but has such depth of knowledge and life experience. And, there's people who've been foraging for like 30, 40 years, and you just hang out with them for a couple of minutes and you're like, wow, I know nothing, compared to some of these people. So
I love that. I love coming up, like not against, but like coming into contact with an individual who is just like so deeply knowledgeable. I mean, I love that. I mean, that's the best feeling. So I would like to mention Hope Flanagan. She's an Ojibwe elder, and she works for Dream of Wild Health, which is an Ojibwe farm here in Minnesota. And she's just so phenomenally knowledgeable. It's just like, I can't. And so I see her every year at the Midwest Wild Harvest Festival and like around. I just wanted to mention her.
Yeah, give her awesome. For sure. Give her a shout out. I mean, and that's one of the things that people are always asking me is like, how did you learn so much about mushrooms? I'm like, well, I mean, a lot of it was self-taught, but some of it was getting really lucky and getting to go out with people who had knowledge, because you will learn so much more from spending an hour or two walking around in the woods with someone who can tell you the story. And exactly what we were talking about, like creating context and meaning and experience to help you remember these things rather than just trying to memorize lists of stuff. Because I think there's very few human beings who are good at systematically looking through a book and internalizing it. I know a few of them, and those are the people that I go to for help with mushroom ID, because I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And they're like, oh, it's this species. And you're like, how could you possibly have known that? But that's because they're there to index, and I'm here to just find stuff and marvel at it, and I can hopefully find the resource to help me identify it. But so I want to ask you too about some non-mushroom things. You are a twin, and you're also an athlete. So I've seen you and your brother do some pretty athletic stuff, but can you talk a little bit about, like, I think you played football in high school, and you've done like triathlons, and like, whenever I look at your athletic stuff, I'm like, man, I got a gut. I'm like, I got a bad hip. I'm not going anywhere in a hurry. But Tim is just out there like killing it. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about physical activity and what that's meant for you.
Yeah, I've been an athlete most of my life, so that kind of tied into being outdoors, I believe. I'm not sure, chicken or the egg thing, but yeah, football in high school, also rugby. Played rugby for 15 years. Started that in high school as well. Let's see, what else? Done a lot of martial arts. So
cool.
In 2013, I was the Freestyle Judo national champion.
Wow.
That was pretty cool. And then I promptly stopped doing Judo.
You had to go it on top, right? That's
right. Yep. I was like, can't risk it for the biscuit ever again. This is just, I've peaked. And then, let's see, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai. I did karate just for the laughs. Not like a truly effective martial art there. Sorry, karate people. But yeah, I mean, and then I've started doing I think it was 3 years ago now, which is kind of wild, a Spartan race.
Oh, yeah.
It's, if you've heard of Tough Mudder, or this is kind of like the more athletic version of Tough Mudder, I would say.
The more athletic, okay. The less messy, but more athletic.
Still a little bit messy, but not focused on being messy. It's it's still kind of gimmicky, to be honest. There's one station where you have to run up and you throw a spear at a target. And
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, the other half of my heritage is just pure Viking. So I was like, I was also born for this. And I just nailed it from 30 yards. It was crazy. And everyone else was missing. But yeah, and so that, I think that really ties into foraging takes, at least some level of mobility, I would say. Definitely not athleticism, especially mushroom hunting. It is the slowest I move other than sleeping is mushroom hunting. People think oh, this must be a great workout. I'm like, not really. I mean, I'm just standing, walking less than 1 mile per hour. But the hills, I mean, if you start to get the mushroom bug and you're just looking at a hill full of oak trees and it's chanterelle season, it's you gotta. So,
you gotta go up.
Yeah, have some high topped boots and don't twist your ankle and just go up that thing. It'll definitely give you good legs.
That's true. The other thing I would say, and if you get a macro lens, you'll find yourself going up and down a lot because you have to get down to the level of what you want to take a photo of. So certainly my glutes have gotten a good workout. Even though I don't walk that far, I'm just constantly dropping down and taking photos of tiny things. And sometimes you're in weird yoga positions. I don't know if the Fungi guy, Ali, has a great video on mushroom yoga and these weird positions you get into as you're trying to find a mushroom and pick something. And so there's a level of athleticism that is maybe a little bit less than a Spartan race, but is a little bit above sitting on your couch. And I think that's what you get out of mushroom hunting. So.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely feel the burn. I mean, I did yoga in college as well, and I think I've never been stronger. It never felt like I was getting strong, but I mean, the before and after was crazy. I mean, I think without benching at all, I added 50 pounds to my bench after a year of yoga, and I didn't even lift that year. And so it was really crazy. I think, traversing a natural landscape, an uneven landscape, and just being a human over terrain is going to tie your musculature in, and it's just going to strengthen you in general. I mean, what's better for being a human than just doing what our bodies were made for? So.
Yeah, well, it's instead of going to a gym and isolating these little pieces of us that we're oh, my shoulders be bigger, so I'm going to do this motion a bunch of times. It's you go out, you move, your core is engaged, all your muscles are working.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value that comes out of just, like you said, being a human on a landscape.
It's a holistic approach, and I think you can't really avoid looking at the world more holistically when you're foraging, because you are learning a forest for its entirety of its being, its cycles and everything. Yeah, I mean, if you sometimes if you go in rugby or judo and you have an opponent who is just clearly yoked to the gills, just huge boulder shoulders, and you're no neck, and you're wow, this is gonna be I'm about to have a rough next couple minutes. Yeah. But then it turns out that they're not actually strong. And you're wait, how does that make sense? But it's because, they isolated, and something developing in isolation can't get strong as something that's holistic. So.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar experience in swimming where I'd see these guys who are I'm not particularly cut. I'm kind of, flabby and whatever. And like, there's these guys that are just like Adonis kind of thing. And I'd like hop in the pool and like, oh man, they're going to just smoke me. And then we'd start swimming and be like, I'm like a lap ahead of them because they're all muscle and there's no coordination. I'm like, I'm nice and floppy. I move quickly through the water.
Do you ever, just to like rub it in, do you ever like dolphin out of the water?
Occasionally, just a little undulation there.
Yeah. Yeah.
God, our coach used to make us do 500s of dolphin kick. That was, yeah, I was in good shape then. Wow. That was good. Anyhow, so
I sink like a rock. So I like swimming, but I'm just right to the bottom. It's crazy.
Well, you need a little more of that, a little extra flab. It'll give you some more,
yeah. See, the only time of the year I gain like the flab right now, for instance, when I'm under 6 feet of snow. Yeah, I mean, I can't really like swim, except I do. I mean, I definitely do like chainsaw a hole in the lake and then jump in. Usually at least once a week.
I've done polar bear club like once or twice in my life, which is like the day after New Year's. You like get together with people on a beach and dive in the cold water. But you do that every week?
Yeah, at least. For sure.
Well, no wonder why you're cut. That'll keep you going. Your metabolism will stay up. So,
for sure.
So your physical activity, your mushroom hunting, and then there's something else we got to talk about, which is your mushroom memes and just nature memes in general, because you are one of the most fantastic curators of meme content on Instagram. And I just, how do you keep up with it? There's so much, and yet you share so many wonderful things.
I mean, yeah, like you said, I curate it. So, like a museum that's focused on, like a very readily available and high quality, collection, or like I don't know what you'd call it. I have so many memes just readily available to me on the internet, and it's just like up to me to like scour the or spelunk the internet and then come back and post it to everybody. There's a lot of groups that say on social media that I'd rather not be a part of because I feel like they're kind of getting to where they're polluting my mental state. But I do that for you guys. I'm taking that hit. Yeah. So yeah, that's mostly social media. There's a lot of cool nature themed just random groups. So I try to join as many of those.
There's some pretty silly stuff out there, but it's fun to watch your story, and it's highly entertaining. So it's a good reason to follow Tim beyond his massive sort of foraging and all the other things he does. These memes are spicy and delicious.
Yeah, they definitely kept me in the fight for 2020. I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had one that I was particularly fond of, which was if you follow morphological keys, which is in a lot of these mushroom books that are very dense. There's a lot of text. There's long lists of morphological keys. So, it says the cap is umbonate and the stipe is this and the blah, blah, blah. And it uses a lot of terminology that if you're not familiar with it, even if you are familiar with it, is still pretty esoteric. So I don't like morphological keys because that was what was originally handed to me when I said, I'm into mushrooms, and someone's like, here, take this book. And I was like, what is all this text that I don't understand? Right. And I'm like, I'm a visual person. I need to see pictures, which is why I like iNaturalist, which is why I liked Instagram. But these books are morphological keys, and you've made the point that if you follow this morphological key, you could basically mistake an olive for a dolphin.
Yeah, that was a wild time. The dolphin time was just a pure free fall into insanity, and yeah, it was a good time. Yeah, dolphins are olives. I mean, they are the olives of the sea. The conspiracy goes deeper than you want to know. Probably the CIA with the birds not being real.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you guys don't know about the big conspiracy out there, birds aren't real. Birds are drones.
Yeah, birds have been drones since at least the 70s.
Okay, that was the 50s, 70s, yeah.
Yeah, at least the 50s, yeah, for sure. I mean,
just look at a bird. Nothing about it is real.
Yeah, there's no reason to even play into the concept of a bird. Obviously fake.
So I guess I wanted to ask you about chaga, which will also, I'm sure, lead us to one of the original OG mushroom queens who, well, when I say queen, not referring to gender, but simply referring to their status as a mushroom meme maker. But do you find chaga? Do you have birch trees? Is that something you bump into?
We have a ton of chaga. We even have like chaga farms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Minnesota's like prime territory in northern Minnesota. We have like mostly birch forest up there.
That's great. I mean, because I get people are asking me all the time, is this chaga? And you're like, that's a meme, and that cracks me up that you're asking me this because you're not even in an area that has birch trees. So no, whatever like random gall you're looking on the side of a tree is not chaga. And that's a good point. Is chaga is not a mushroom. Chaga is more like a tumor growth. That's a myceliated tumor growth. That's like mostly plant material rather than mushroom material. I don't think it's a fruiting body because it's not producing spores, right?
Yeah, it's like a what is it? Sclerotium?
Sclerotia or sclerotium or something like that. Yeah, it's mushroom mass and plant mass, but it's just a big lump. It's essentially like a fungal-induced tree tumor.
Yeah, it's mostly birch wood, and it's just the tree going like, oh my God, I'm being eaten. I'm trying not to get eaten. And then it just grows that, yeah.
And so it is full of bioactive compounds, which in certain publications have been shown to have types of bioactive properties, but more often than not, it's not really necessarily translatable to human health, and there's no real evidence that it has any effect in our human systems. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I am saying that maybe paying $50 for a little vial of ground chaga is kind of a ripoff. And there is a meme that goes around, or series of memes perpetrated by someone that we know about chaga and how people should boof it because this is sort of a there's such a
almost choked.
Such a hype around chaga that people are like, well, just put it up your butt, and that's the best way to take it, kind of thing. And there's so much misinformation that's the joke that is every time someone mentions chaga is, well, just boof it.
Yeah, and so nobody spells chaga correctly.
Yeah.
It's always changa or some other iteration. It's the craziest thing. Every time, without fail.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good meme material out there on chaga. Our friend Matt, who formerly was on Instagram, Nemophilus Tendencies, he is still out there churning out memes. You'll find him on Reddit. You'll see him on Facebook. I know that Tim does a great job of helping to bring some of that meme material to the Instagram community. So.
Yeah, he had that meme account for a while called Holy Shiitake. I think there's like some pretenders out there right now that are not him. Not him. But yeah, he is sorely missed from Instagram.
Yeah. We do miss him. He's on Facebook. It's not the same though. I don't want to be on Facebook all the time.
I know. Facebook's tough. I just try to get in, get the memes, grab the bag and dash. Yep. Yeah, we do get chaga up here a lot, though. I just found it surprisingly, I just found it for the first time this year. And when I say I found it, I mean my wife found it. So the elf, she just has these elf eyes, and she just spotted it, right on the side of the trail. A very well-used trail. Probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people walk it every year. And so, I was like, oh my God, is that actually chaga?
Do you have any advice on sort of harvesting it sustainably? Because that's one of the things I worry about is people are just going around hacking off pieces of trees all over the place. And there's no better way to kill a tree and give it a fungal pathogen than to chop a giant hole in it. Because that's the point of bark is like skin. So if you were to cut a whole giant hole in our skin, we'd probably get an infection. Same thing happened to trees. So
yeah, as far as the tree health, I wouldn't worry about that too much just because birch, at least up here, aren't long-lived. They're definitely an early successional species, so they
okay, so they'll kind of come up, die off. Something else.
I mean, they're living around here. I think they're living 80 years, and so if one is infected with Anonitus obliquus, the Latin name for chaga, they're I mean, they don't have that long left. I mean, they can last 20 years though, on a single birch tree. But if you are trying to harvest it, don't hatch it out, just the whole wedge of chaga, and just leave a gaping, hole there. Definitely just knock off some of it so it has a chance to start growing back from that area. It'll take 5 to 10 years to grow back. I mean, this is
but it'll kind of heal over itself if you don't cut out a huge wedge. You just take off part of it. It'll kind of
Yeah, just don't cut. Some people, I've honestly seen some people cut deeply into the tree because they want every last piece of chaga. You're not getting more chaga, really. You're getting
just getting wood.
Wood, yeah.
Yeah, it's just wood. And that's why I caution people too, because you're out there buying chaga at this expensive price that's been ground down. You're probably buying wood. I mean, it is ultimately just wood that you're paying for. There's some bioactive compounds, but no one is sitting there doing assays to tell you the concentration of those bioactive compounds or anything about it. So there's no scientific rigor to it. So again, be wary when you buy your chaga. Try to get it from people who are sustainable, who understand what they're doing with the land and sourcing stuff. Ideally, I think there's probably some sense that maybe you should harvest chaga when it's drier than when it's wetter, because when it's wetter, trees are more likely to get fungal pathogens invading them. I don't know if there's anything to that. That would be my guess. You know, it's when you trim your fruit trees, you're supposed to do it when it's dry, not raining, so that you don't get fungal pathogens in your fruit
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But yeah.
Someone just asked, and we got to go here in one sec, but do you grow any of your own mushrooms, or are you sort of a forager mainly, or do you have any projects at home?
I just started my first. So Erin and I, my wife, we just moved into our house September of 2019. So we kind of like watched the land and see how it, you know, we have like about 1.5 acres, but like right in the city. So it's nice. Weird, but we kind of just like didn't change anything on the land that first year just to see what comes up, and we're really pleasantly surprised by like a lot of the mushrooms that came up in our little forest, and a lot of the plants that volunteered. So I didn't try to grow too much, but at the end of last year I did put in a wine cap bed.
Nice. Yeah.
Actually 3 of them, so they're probably all like impressive. 4 by 16 wine cap beds.
That's a lot of wine caps.
It's a lot. I hope they take off. I had to do it twice because the first time didn't take, so then I had to buy some spawn. But yeah, that was super easy. I just got like 60 yards of wood chips delivered to me for free from this app called Chip Drop. And so like there's a picture, there's a really funny picture of me sitting on top of the pile. Like from far away, it initially looks like I'm pretty happy, but I zoom in on my face and just explode that up, and I'm just like so concerned. Like I'm just like, you know, because I had to move all that by a wheelbarrow, but that eventually became mushroom food. So yeah, I do that outdoors. I don't grow anything inside yet, but I'm thinking of, you know, getting my agar set up to start cultivating some wild species, and that should be cool. Getting a microscope soon too. So.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so exciting. I love, again, this is why like the best mycologists out there are just amateurs and enthusiasts and people who decided to do the work themselves. It's not like you have to go get a fancy education or have an official background in this stuff. You can just start doing things, and don't be overwhelmed, because it's not like you're going to get to where we are in a day, a week, a month. It takes time, and it takes learning those things one by one and having those experiences to then build up to the point that you feel comfortable and ideally motivated enough to keep doing this stuff. You know, if it doesn't speak to you on a primal level, you don't have to keep doing it. Do what you want to do, you know?
Right. Yeah. And you got to start somewhere. I mean, you're not going to be an expert in a day, right? So just like accept that you are where you are and just start. I mean, the best time was yesterday. The second best time is today to do anything. So just go full steam ahead.
And if you are stuck inside in winter, it's a great time. Get some books. Time your brain for getting out there and finding lots of interesting stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Gordon. It was awesome to talk to you.
That we get to have beers in real life sometime soon and get to, you know, do some mushroom hunting. And if you're in California, you and Aaron are always welcome to hang out in the guest room, and hopefully you can go find some mushies. But
yeah, that'd be great. And the offer is obviously extended to Minnesota as well, if you ever find yourself in Minnesota.
I would very much like to come out there sometime in the summer and check out your like peak season kind of. That's like a dream of me, to go visit all my like mushroom friends in their peak season and get a chance to like a little slice of what they get to experience kind of thing. So
yeah, I have 3 ideas for peak season, so we'll have to talk about what you want.
Well, you're right. Peak seasons for different things. Yeah, I can think of a bunch of times you might want to come out here to California, but should be good. So anyhow, thanks again. Much love to everyone. Thank you for watching, and go follow Tim. He's got a website, ironwoodforaging.com, ironwoodforagingco.com. He's president of the Minnesota Mycological Society, and follow Minnesota Forager. It's a good dude. Thanks, Tim.
Yep. See ya.
Bye, guys.